Welcome to an adventure in how to move people and goods around very efficiently or not need to. Our first mobility lecture here explores mainly automobiles, that is, cars and light trucks. Light trucks comprise pickups, vans, and sports utility vehicles or SUVs. Then the second lecture will turn to heavy transport and the important non-vehicular side of the mobility revolution. First, just a moment's calibration using Bloomberg's 2024 data. General mobility of people and goods using machines rather than by human or animal muscle is 93% fueled by oil, 6% by biofuels, 1% by coal, that's rail, little ship, I guess, and a fraction of a percent by electricity. Mobility uses 27% of the world's primary energy, but 63% of total oil consumption. And by the way, 12% of the oil is used for non-fuel purposes. That 63% for the world rises to 68% in the mobility-intensive United States. You might be surprised it's not even higher than that. But of course, we also make a lot of petrochemicals and other things other than transport. Now, of the world's total final energy use, 21% runs road transport, 3% fuels ships, 3% aviation, and 1% railways. Burning oil emits 34% of the world's fossil CO2. So 63% of 34%, mobility causes 21% of those CO2 emissions, or actually a fourth if you count all Scope 1 and 2 emissions. However, aviation's causal share of global warming is around 6 or 8%, not just its 3% share of the oil, due to its water vapor and other emissions. And it's the fastest growing transport sector. So in summary, mobility uses over 3/5 of the world's oil and emits 1/5 of all fossil carbon. Fortunately, neither of those burdens is necessary. Let's start with a little history. China invented the oil, gas, and coal industries more than a millennium ago, but for the past 20 centuries, its world-leading economy was temporarily eclipsed, dimming its innovation and its technical leadership. Thus, around 1850, nearly all Western oil came from giant sea mammals called whales, and it was burned in lamps. Whaling was America's 5th biggest industry, exporting extensively to Europe. It was more important than the oil industry is now. Yet in a single century, whaling grew to world dominance and suddenly disappeared. What happened? Well, strong demand and global hunting made whales shy and scarce. Costs rose as fleets got bigger but less productive. So prices of whale oil got volatile and shot past the price of coal oil. Lamp conversion kits emerged. Michael Dietz's clean burning model paid back in months and flipped the whole market in 3 years. So in the 9 years before Drake struck oil in Pennsylvania, rock oil or petroleum, whale oil lost over 5/6 of its lighting market. The whalers were astounded to run out of customers before they ran out of whales. The remnant whale populations were saved by technological innovators and profit-maximizing capitalists, until those same forces of industrialization killed even more whales in the 20th century, further impoverishing the whole marine ecosystem by removing its fertility base of whale poop. Now, today, the United States spends upwards of $2 billion a day on oil, and maybe twice that much again on the economic and military costs of oil dependence. The industry that supplies that oil remains the most politically potent in the world, especially in Washington, D.C. Yet efficiency is an even bigger and cheaper competitor to oil today. My 2014 Shell paper, Efficiency, the Rest of the Iceberg, explains how oil companies can run their supply-side tankers into the hidden efficiency iceberg and sink without even knowing what they hit, because they weren't properly tracking efficiency, so it wasn't on their chart. Well, they hit another iceberg first with the 2020 pandemic. As we'll see, that slump in oil demand triggered a train of events that probably mean the world's oil use peaked in 2019. That's in between coal's peak in 2014 and gas's peak in 2023. Experts from the heads of Shell and BP to Moody's and Boston Consulting Group suspect that oil demand will never recover. Which oil and gas markets are in danger from disruptions? Nearly all of them. Over decades, reserves unburnable for climate reasons could well prove smaller than reserves unsellable for competitive reasons. That is, oil companies are even more at risk from market competition than from climate regulation. If the oil business sputters at $90 a barrel and stalls at $50, how will it do against the $10 or $20 and soon zero or less cost of getting U.S. mobility completely off oil? What if the biggest challenge, as for whale oil 140 odd years ago, was not falling price, but vanishing demand? Are an oil major's competitors other hydrocarbon companies? Or are they people like these whose innovations can be to the oil business as Dietz's lamp was to whaling? Some of their innovations are technologies, but most of them are more disruptive. They're new business and financial models and breakthrough design methods, all stirred vigorously with IT. These new vectors of transformation all reinforce and speed each other in a fertile mix with innovative policies, crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, new development patterns, shifting tastes and values, and Silicon Valley culture. Now, the past half-century's gyrations in the world oil market are characteristic of most commodities, but exacerbated by oil's strategic importance and unstable, complicated geopolitics. From 1970 to 2019, world demand for oil grew gradually, but remarkably steadily, heading from left to right in this graph. And that's despite wildly fluctuating prices on the vertical axis. But this unusual graph of price against demand reveals, starting at the lower left, a wild roller coaster ride with repeated loop-the-loops, just as other commodities do. That is, when price rises enough, demand falls, price then crashes, and the cycle repeats. Yeehaw, fasten to your seatbelt. But meanwhile, oil has become uncompetitive even at low prices before it becomes unavailable even at high prices. Now, so far, the oil savings have come from incremental technologies moving at the pace of big, slow industries in old, stodgy markets. But what if innovations as stunningly fast and game-changing as, say, LED and lighting move demand dramatically back down towards the lower left? Well, we're about to find out. Henry Ford on the left industrialized the car after his friend and former employer Thomas Edison on the right invented the electricity industry. Now they're combining to eat the third great late 19th century industry, John D. Rockefeller's oil business, that fueled those cars. As we might imagine, Ford mischievously muttering to Edison, electric cars will displace gasoline, and when electric cars add flexibility and distributed storage to the grid and make batteries, therefore distributed solar power, cheap and ubiquitous, that will help efficiency and renewables, optionally including batteries made mainly for electric cars, and all that stuff will displace giant power plants and the fossil fuels that they burn. RMI's 2011 automotive analysis in the book Reinventing Fire showed how to save about 95% of U.S. automobiles' officially forecasted fuel demand in 2050, a third through fitter vehicles that I'll explain, and two-thirds by the electrification that fitter vehicles can accelerate. The result was $2.5 trillion cheaper in net present value than business as usual. By whatever sequence, that's where we're headed, only probably faster and at even lower cost because the batteries got 12-fold cheaper. That's a far bigger and faster drop than we or anyone else had imagined. Reinventing Fire found that saving U.S. transportation fuels could cost $2.2 trillion and save $6.5 trillion net present value, So the net saving, just subtracting, is $4.3 trillion plus all avoided externalities. And over a decade later, that's looking very conservative. As you can see, automobiles dominate the gross and net energy savings available in the United States and the money savings. So let's start there. Even without most of today's revolution in shared and connected mobility, often provided as a service, the United States, for example, can greatly enhance all kinds of passenger and freight mobility, as in the subtitle, while phasing out oil at a cost that we conservatively assessed in 2011 as averaging $17 per saved barrel. That's across all transport modes. Well, now that cost is well under $7 and heading for or below zero over the next few years. We can first get efficient by technologies that were included or overlooked in the official 2010 forecast by the Energy Information Administration, EIA. And we can use vehicles a bit more productively. Then we can switch fuels, but there's not much fuel left to switch. Super efficient autos can use any mixture of hydrogen fuel cells, electricity, which is now emerging as the leader, and advanced biofuels. Market will figure out that mix. And now the actual oil plus biofuels value, the black star, is a bit above our curve at the intersection of the orange and yellow wedges, drawn 14 years earlier. Electricity is now winning. Heavy trucks can then realistically use electricity, advanced biofuels, or hydrogen. The same options compete in aviation, but the point is no vehicles, as we'll see, not even airplanes, will need oil. Thanks to efficient use, any biofuels needed could be made 2/3 from waste without displacing cropland or harming climate and soil. And since we did this analysis, biofuels are looking like a smaller need, displaced more by electricity. Now, to look at the big wedge of officially overlooked efficiency, the darker aqua or blue wedge, the second one down, let's start with the biggest oil user, automobiles. And for the convenience of people used to US units, I will express efficiency in miles per US gallon, or MPG, or their equivalent, MPGE, or equivalent, if not fueled by gasoline. And if you want to convert between MPG and liters per 100 kilometers used in most of the rest of the world, or vice versa, just divide 235.2 by either unit and you'll get the other one. Now, what's wrong with this picture from the US Department of Energy? Well, nothing except how it's widely misinterpreted. In a typical car in the US fleet, so we'll call it an AV car, and neglecting the small accessory loads, 4/5 of the energy in combined city and highway driving is lost in the engine, its parasitic losses, and its mechanical drivetrain that transmits torque to the wheels. Those are all collectively called the powertrain, from fuel to wheels. But only 1/5 of the fuel energy reaches the wheels. Most people would conclude that efforts to save fuel should therefore focus on the powertrain because that's where the big losses are. Much as Willie Sutton, when asked why he robbed banks, supposedly replied, because that's where the money is. But redrawing the data tells the opposite story. Of the roughly 1/5 of the AV car's fuel energy that reaches the wheels and moves the car against its tractive load, nearly half heats the air. Most of the rest heats the tires and road. And only about the last 6% of the fuel energy accelerates the car and then heats the brakes when you stop. Oh, it gets worse. 19/20 of the mass you're accelerating is the heavy steel car. So just a 20th of that 6%, or about 0.3% of the fuel energy, ultimately moves the driver. not very gratifying after 1 1/3 centuries of devoted engineering effort. And mass causes both the inertial load to accelerate the car and the rolling resistance, and therefore causes most of the tractive load. Focusing mainly on powertrain efficiency is harder than reducing tractive load because so much has already been done to the powertrain. It's also less rewarding because saving 1 unit of energy in the powertrain saves only 1 unit of fuel in the tank, while saving 1 unit of energy at the wheels avoids 4 units lost in getting that energy to the wheels. So altogether, it leverages 5 units of energy saved at the tank. Therefore, we should first reduce tractive load, then improve the powertrain. The powertrain then shrinks for the same acceleration, F equals ma, and that saves even more mass, and it saves capital cost to help pay for the lightweighting. Now, one of the all-time master lightweighters whose Model T was made possible by a lightweight key part made of a new vanadium steel put it this way: that weight may be desirable in a steamroller, but nowhere else. The most beautiful things in the world are those from which all excess weight has been eliminated. Whenever anyone suggests to me I might increase weight or add a part, I look into decreasing weight and eliminating a part. Right. Ford also said that a light man can outrun a heavy man, and you don't need weight for strength. All this is in principle known to every auto engineer, but you would never guess that when you look at what's on the road all around us. Over the past half century, new U.S. autos have become steadily heavier, the blue line, twice as powerful, the yellow line, and starting halfway through this period, twice as efficient in green, also slightly bigger in orange at the bottom. But marketing has ruled the industry's evolution. Efficiency and emissions were afterthoughts driven by regulation and considered a trade-off against other desirable attributes. That is, most automakers, especially in the United States, were stuck in regulatory compliance mentality, not competitive breakthrough mentality. The post-2005 efficiency gain, where the green curve starts really heading up, was delayed, therefore, by 2 decades, and so was the emission result. Repeating that pattern now could be a lot harder because more efficient autos now have superior driver attributes and increasingly competitive prices and the strong consensus of the U.S. automakers behind them. But it's not a very happy history, and you can see how it happened. Thus, U.S. corporate average fuel economy, or CAFE standards at the upper left, were required by law to keep up with technology, but Detroit's lobbying power blocked actual improvements. Look at that long flat line, a quarter century of stagnation. Weight, in the next 3 graphs along the top, crept up with size, safety emission standards, and also added customer features in orange on this graph. And cars were meanwhile swamped by SUVs and pickups that are, as in the colored graphs in the lower left graph. And those are heavily marketed because they're more profitable. Thus, for 2 decades, epidemic obesity made U.S. autos gain weight twice as fast as its occupants did. They even gained density, which has no value for function or safety. In model year 2020, weight reached a new record above its 1975 level. Powertrain efficiency also roughly doubled, but virtually all the potential fuel savings, as you can see at the upper right, went into faster acceleration of the heavier mass. So the average new auto took 20 years to get more efficient and then only incrementally. And now cars are an ever smaller part of the fleet as SUVs and pickups take over. Back in 1991, when I addressed the National Academy's Auto Efficiency Symposium, the then Big Three automakers claimed that efficiency could improve only about 10% without making cars unaffordable, unsafe, or unsellable. How did they reach this conclusion? Well, they divided the future into two periods, too soon to change anything and too far off to speculate about, with nothing in between. Well, by model year 2019, the average new auto's efficiency had slipped back to 24.9 miles per gallon. That's only 16% better than in 1991, because 56% of them were light trucks, almost all SUVs. And that more than offset the modest efficiency gains achieved in 12 of the previous 15 years. And then cars gained another 200 pounds of weight in 3 years. Why isn't that good enough? Well, automotive obesity has added a third of the mass of today's autos in 4 decades, and it's now accelerating. The average new U.S. auto in 2024 weighed 4,419 pounds, 2,005 kilograms. So it added 115 kilos, 253 pounds just in 4 years. And that helped drive crash fatality rates to a 20-year high, far above comparable countries. We have juggernauts. The extra mass is mainly due to more trucks and some to more electric vehicles because of their batteries, especially when you have electric trucks. Some electric pickups now weigh 4 short tons. The Hummer EV pickup weighs up to 4.6 tons. That's almost 4,200 kilograms. That's not far from the mass of a 14-passenger airport shuttle bus. Just its battery pack weighs 1,279 kilos. That's more than a 2020 Honda Civic automobile. And yet batteries don't need to make autos heavy. The proof is that Tesla's EVs are made of metal, and yet they weigh about the same as the average U.S. auto. And most of the industry has so far missed the opportunity for ultralight, ultra-strong materials like carbon fiber composites to make dramatic weight savings snowball and make autos simpler and cheaper to build. Lighter and more slippery autos need less force to move them, so their engine gets smaller, and those vehicles' fitness then makes electric autos affordable because their batteries or fuel cells get much smaller, lighter, and cheaper. So their sticker price will fall to about today's level with far lower driving costs. And this specific sequence of innovations I outlined over a decade ago is what's happening. It can transform automakers from wringing tiny savings out of essentially Victorian steel stamping and engine technologies to the steeply falling costs of 3 mutually reinforcing technologies: ultralight materials, their advanced manufacturing into autos, and electric propulsion. If you exploit 3 steep and synergistic learning curves while your competitor has largely exhausted one, you probably win. Now, to be sure, electric and even hybrid vehicles make ultralighting somewhat less important to efficiency because regenerative braking can recover and reuse most of the braking energy previously lost as heat. Well, that's why energy use in gasoline cars in yellow, diesels in orange, or hybrids in brown rises much more steeply with weight than in plug-in hybrids shown in aqua or battery cars at the bottom in blue. However, simultaneously further shrinking mass and air drag and rolling resistance is now ready to produce the next several-fold step change in auto efficiency, as we'll see. So how much more would that cost, to take out those 3 kinds of losses? Some GM old-timers taught me, in God we trust, all others bring data. So my team examined the data. Among all model year 2010 U.S. cars sold, there was no convincing correlation between curb mass and sticker price in any of the 3 main market segments. There was also a huge horizontal scatter in curb mass for cars of broadly similar market segment and price. And that suggests major differences in design, even though they're virtually all made of about the same materials. This is even more true of the coefficient of aerodynamic drag, which ranges from less than 0.25 to nearly 0.4 at similar cost within broadly similar market segments. U.S. National Research Council, NRC, says that aerodynamic drag reductions of up to 20% add just $100 of manufacturing cost. And an automaker design I'll mention in a moment confirmed this by saving 19% for under $70. Tires' coefficient of rolling resistance, shown here for a common size, was even more striking. Over a decade ago, we found $60 could buy you a tire with nearly 2/5 less drag than the worst tire, generally without compromising durability or handling or ride or safety. So these three rough and ready comparisons for the main physics parameters that determine the tractive load, how much energy it takes to move the car, suggest that blanket assumptions about the cost of efficiency may not be correct. Let's dig a little deeper. How low can tractive load go? Well, your Society of Automotive Engineers reading will help you study how these early warning signals enabled accurate inferences. It shows this table of my early 1990s analyses of critical platform parameters, seeking to infer from historic concept car and component data what efficiencies production cars should be able to achieve over a few decades, that is, by about now. And those estimates were heavily criticized. But a quarter century later, they are eerily close to actual market offerings. That kind of over-the-horizon radar signal is vital if you want to substitute accurate technological foresight for unpleasant surprises in the market. But this isn't only about the numbers. It's even more about what questions auto designers ask in what order. In other words, it's about design. In 2007, a major automaker's research director and I co-led an intensive proprietary study driven from the top of the firm using its best analysts, its excellent analytic tools, but asking a new design question, namely, how much lightweighting could we pay for by shrinking the powertrain to get the same acceleration of that lighter vehicle? Well, starting at the wheels, that lightweighting first emphasis gave astonishing results even without using ultralight materials or electric powertrain. The base vehicle was a compact car already in high volume production, with no compromised driver attributes or new technologies or wishful thinking. And then many paths could yield 60% higher automotive efficiency at an extra gross manufacturing cost slightly over $1,200 in 2007. So the retail payback was under 2 years, and we could beat Prius efficiency, the acme of the time, without using a hybrid powertrain. And the automaker's extra cost could plausibly be offset by CAFE credits and carbon credits. The marketing and business cases were robust, including doubled manufacturing margins and maybe doubled dealer margins. Wow. And the key design insight was that the 31% lower mass, using light metals, not composites, could make acceleration 1/7 faster using only half the engine displacement. And then that smaller powertrain helped to pay for cutting the tractive load by about 1/3. Those findings, applicable company-wide, would be even more valuable if used to enable advanced powertrains sooner, notably electrification, which at the time would get you laughed out of the room. But that changed pretty quickly. And these results informed the company's production intent. They proved profoundly important for strategy, and yet they are inconsistent with industry positions in a lot of recent debates about auto efficiency. And as we will see, the standard way people analyze efficiency potential using incremental supply curves that add up individual efficiency technologies conceals these results. They are revealed only by whole system, whole vehicle design. Now, the ultralight carbon fiber electric cars that I invented 34 years ago, we designed with industry 25 years ago, and then Toyota used our shared methods 18 years ago to design as a 70% lighter weight plug-in hybrid, entered the market in 2013 with this profitable 124 miles per gallon electric model or equivalent model. But even 1-ton lightened aluminum fleet vans like this hybrid model that an RMI spinoff called Bright Automotive developed and road tested in 2009 would be able to save a fifth of U.S. auto fuel at lower life cycle cost with no subsidy. And carbon fiber autos made in our simplified way at normal cost could save far more oil than Saudi Arabia lifts. At an extra cost that 15 years ago was under $18 per saved barrel. Today it's under $7. And sometime between last year and a few years from now, depending on model and location, that extra cost is falling below zero or has already. Now, automakers were really interested in that design at the upper left, and they told RMI's Hypercar Center in 2000 that they would love to make cars out of carbon fiber, but they didn't really know how to do it cost effectively. So they asked if we could prove our conceptual manufacturing process and make them some parts. So we did. Led by Dave Kramer, who now leads Apple's composites work, my team made, among other things, this ultralight carbon cap, tougher than titanium. You can hear it ring like a bell. And it was made in 1 minute in 2004 as a test piece for the military ballistic helmet shown at the upper right. Our process may still be the best of 18 competing ones. It digitally lays up resin-impregnated, so-called pre-preg, continuous carbon fiber and thermoplastic tape into a flat, tailored blank, which could have variable thickness, mixed fibers, built-in holes, anisotropy, which means different strength or stiffness in different directions. It can have whatever layup will best match the load paths once you thermoform it to that shape. In other words, you vacuum consolidate the blank so it's nice and flat and fairly dense. Then you warm it up with Wendy's heat lamps so it softens, and then you stamp it onto a hot die, cool it, that takes the minute, and trim it. So it's a very fast process. And RMI's FiberForge spinoff, after serving a bunch of industrial and military customers, sold that process to a German tier one press maker in 2013. 3 years later, it could make a complex 2x2 meter carbon fiber structural part in 1 minute, and you could make it several fold faster still if you wanted. So it turned out the ultralighting is approximately free. It was paid for by a 2/3 smaller propulsion system, smaller powertrain, and by radically simpler and cheaper automaking, as I'll explain. So at that time, about 4 to 7 automakers and multiple tier one suppliers were seriously exploring carbon fiber autos, some with production intent, aided by 2 Department of Energy funded efforts we helped launch. A lot of that effort has progressed nicely, is underway, and China's national strategy reportedly pursues the same goal. Now, most of the best race cars and military aircraft are made of carbon fiber composites, often by tedious hand layup like tailoring fine clothing, and then you bake epoxy resin in a giant autoclave. That's a very slow, costly process. Here's a recent naked carbon example, that is, the fiber's not painted. And such handcrafted carbon fiber custom cars cost around $2 million each. Lotus sold out all 130 copies for $2.3 million each of the 1,680 kilogram carbon fiber electric Evija, advertised as the first fully electric British hypercar. It's 2 megawatts of battery power, producing nearly 2,000 horsepower, make it the world's most powerful production car. Now, both these models accelerate 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in well under 3 seconds. In case you're wondering, the current acceleration record is 1.5 seconds in the first 30 meters, that is 7 car lengths. And it was set in 2016 by a 168 kilogram carbon fiber racer called Grimsel, made by Swiss students in less than a year. It must be close to qualifying you for a Darwin Award by breaking your full neck and thus removing you from the gene pool, ideally before you can reproduce. Now, aerospace, too, often uses top quality carbon composites. But automaking needs roughly 1,000-fold higher volume and lower cost, and that gap seemed unbridgeable until the early 1990s, when I met Dave Taggart at the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. There he had led the design of a 95% carbon advanced tactical fighter airframe that was a third lighter, but two-thirds cheaper than the 72% metal base design. His clean sheet redesign was so radical it activated the immune system of the Joint Strike Fighter community. So Dave quit. One bounce later, I hired him to lead in 2000 the complete virtual design with two Tier 1 engineering firms in Europe of our carbon fiber midsize SUV, the heart of the market already. It was called Revolution, and its airframe-inspired body, suspended from rings not built up from a tub, had just 14 parts, each made with one low-pressure die set. That saved about 95 to 99% of the tooling cost. Each part can be lifted in one or two hands with no hoist. The biggest part on the side I can briefly lift with one finger. The parts then snap precisely together for bonding, self-fixturing, detoleranced in 2 dimensions, so you don't need the robotic body shop. Laying color in the mold can nearly eliminate the paint shop. So there go the 2 hardest, costliest steps in automaking. That saves roughly 80% of the manufacturing capital. And that plus the 2/3 smaller powertrain paid for the carbon fiber, making the ultralighting approximately free. Now, this car design was stage 2 of RMI's effort to revolutionize the global auto industry. Stage 1 had developed my 1990-91 hypercar concept, which we initially validated with GM and other automakers. But after 2 years, it became clear that GM was culturally unready to collaborate. So RMI's board told us to take the concept out to the whole industry. So in 93, we open sourced it. We made it free like Linux software. And I got most of the world's automakers worried that their competitors would do it first. And by 2000, that tactic had leveraged our $2 or $3 million of philanthropically funded R&D investment into over $10 billion of industry commitments. It sped Japan's hybrid releases, Honda's Insight and Toyota's Prius, and it got serious lightweighting efforts underway around the world. Well, then our hypercar spinoff and 2 Tier 1s designed Revolution. Unfortunately, we sought production capital in November 2000, just as the capital markets collapsed. Bad timing. But our design did intrigue and inspire many automakers. So, as you saw in 2013, 20 years from our open sourcing, our FiberForge process entered the supply chain, and BMW, our #1 target of influence, sold its first hypercars, which I've been driving since 2016. More on that shortly. Here's a little animation of the Revolution with Gen X and Y active outdoor lifestyle luxury crossover styling. It could carry 5 big adults in comfort, plus up to 2 cubic meters of cargo. It could haul a half ton, up a 44% grade. And if you folded down the right-hand seats instead of the back seats, you could carry 2 adults and 2 standard kayaks inside. Being twofold lighter, it could accelerate 0 to 60 miles an hour in 7.1 seconds with just a 1-liter hybrid engine. And you notice there's no steering wheel or pedals. You steer and accelerate and brake with a joystick inserted in the socket on either side of either seat. That improves maneuver and crash safety. And the radically integrated and simplified design put nearly all the functionality in software. So that's a computer with wheels, not a car with chips. A 25-year-old dream of a Tesla or a Sony PlayStation 10. Way cool. But this gets a lot easier, of course, if carbon fiber gets cheap. It was long a niche material. The global production was 2% that of cocoa beans. So when BMW's i3 entered the market in 2013, it was using 3/4 of all the automotive carbon fiber. But 3 years later, of the 1,500 or so unique auto models in the world, over 100 were using carbon fiber, tenfold up in a decade, using some of it somewhere as standard equipment. By 2018, the world was up to 85,000 tons a year, a sixth of it automotive. Well, that was a tiny fraction of the 2 million tons of total automotive composite use, mostly using fiberglass. China was growing the fastest in composites. And in 2020, the automakers are buying about $30 billion of worth of carbon fiber per year. BMW's used carbon fiber roofs for a decade. In 2016, like Ford, they offered carbon fiber wheels as a fancy sports car option. And ESE has road tested one-piece, one-cure wheels weighing under 8 kilograms per wheel, costing under $10,000 a set. Australian firm Carbon Revolution and Alabama firm Vision Wheel, aiming to compete with aluminum on price, are ramping up production of carbon fiber wheels. Some GM sports cars have used carbon fiber hoods, roofs, fenders, floorboards since 2004. Most major automakers have partnerships testing carbon fiber parts all over the vehicle, subframes, engine cradles, even pickup beds, which saved 28 kilograms in GMC's 2019 Sierra Denali, and the curved pultruded rear bumper beam in the 2020 Corvette Stingray was over 60% lighter than the old aluminum extrusion. In 2025, China began operating in Qingdao the world's first high-speed passenger metro train made of carbon fiber, saving 11% of its total weight and 7% of its energy. Now, the cheapest 2016 automotive-grade carbon fiber cost $8 from BMW's partner SGL, $7 from Zoltech. And if that could hit the holy grail of what was then $5, now $6.4 in 2024 dollars per pound, many analysts say autos could quickly use nearly twice as much carbon fiber as the world's making. That price is now an industry expectation, and with good reason. Even in 2016, Oak Ridge National Lab announced textile-grade acrylic can cut carbon fiber cost over 50%. 2 years later, they said oven controls can achieve $4 a pound. National Renewable Energy Lab said it's adapted a 1916 process to make corn stover endothermically into acrylonitrile, which is the main feedback of conventional carbon fiber. Cargill is helping, of course, they are good at corn. Others are progressing with low-energy processes using cheap softwood lignin, algae, scrap polyolefin feedstocks, even coal. Now, an Australian firm has proven about 3/4 less oxidation energy and time in making that white fiber into black carbon fiber. It seems very unlikely that none of this stuff will work. Innovation and scaling are dropping carbon fiber prices toward, and I expect soon through, the price at which the floodgates open. And meanwhile, Brazilian tailings dam disasters, American tariffs, and global supply chain disruptions have made steel costlier. But even at decades-old $8 a pound carbon fiber prices, this material can be competitive too. And BMW proved that in 2013. So this i3 that I drive reportedly made money from the first unit off the assembly line, thanks to brilliantly simplified BMW design and manufacturing. It validated all the benefits we'd been claiming since the early 90s. Sandy Munro, the normally understated dean of automotive costing, called this the most significant vehicle since Ford's Model T and the most advanced vehicle on the planet. Its carbon fiber was indeed paid for by the batteries that its lightness saved, and then fewer batteries mean faster recharging with less power and infrastructure. The integrative design compounds or snowballs the saved weight far more than usually assumed. The manufacturing was indeed radically frugal and confirmed the elimination of the conventional body and paint shops, and turned out to be much better for workers. Overlooked synergies between the ultralight materials and electric traction, quadrupled efficiency without compromise, and with many driver advantages, of which my favorite, aside from great visibility, no blind spot, is that the turning circle is half normal. So it's really agile in the city. The sales of this i3 rose each year. It became Europe's best-selling EV in 2018. It was still in Europe's top 10 in 2020 after Tesla came in. And then BMW extended its model life for a final 2 years and moved its electric expertise and some of its carbon fiber into bigger models. But this one profitably sold 250,000 units. There's even some talk now of bringing it back. And its 5-star crash rating was the final empirical disproof of an old safety myth you might have heard. Old government safety models, discredited and now abandoned by the national academies, but still with lingering influence, said that lighter cars would kill more people. Those models, though, made a basic analytic error. They conflated weight with size, so they assumed that lighter cars meant smaller cars. But in 2003, separating these variables yielded the opposite conclusion from the same data. What protects you turns out to be not weight but size. As you can see, making autos bigger but not heavier saves lives in green, while making autos heavier but not bigger costs lives in red. That's why modern U.S. efficiency standards are now based on size, encouraging light but strong materials that decouple size from weight. Then you can make autos big if you want, thus making them safer and more comfortable, without also making them heavy, which is hostile and inefficient. So we're simultaneously saving lives, oil, money, and carbon. I helped get those rules adopted, and now we need to harmonize Japanese and European with U.S. Standards, because theirs are not based on size. U.S. ones are. Otherwise, global automakers get tugged in opposite directions. Now, even historically, with practically all autos made of steel, at any given weight, the differences in design made some steel cars 2 or 3 times safer than others. Now, newer materials can increase this observed decoupling of safety from weight because their strength and their energy-absorbing properties more than offset their weight reduction. For example, when this carbon fiber SLR McLaren, basically a street-licensed Formula One, got T-boned by a Volkswagen Golf, the SLR got a few scratches, but the Golf was totaled. The SLR's front corners each have a 3.2 kilogram woven carbon epoxy crush cone. And those 2 cones, totaling 0.4% of the weight of the car, can absorb its entire crash energy, hitting a wall at 100 kilometers an hour, or about twice as much kinetic energy at over 140 kilometers an hour if the matrix were a tougher thermoplastic, not epoxy. Now, as this Daimler-Chrysler graphic illustrates, carbon fiber composites can absorb about 6 to 12 times as much crash energy per kilogram as steel. And moreover, that absorption is almost perfectly smooth, as this 42 millisecond crush film illustrates for a glass fiber tube. You see, a well-designed composite crush structure doesn't throw off a metal structure's leg-breaking pressure spike with each accordion fold. It just crushes from end to end, kind of turns into powder, and can yield a perfect, nearly perfect square wave crush response. And therefore, it can use the crush stroke or length up to twice as effectively to absorb the energy. By the way, while we're on safety, fire risk, we now know, is an order of magnitude lower from battery electric cars than from fueled cars. Although this might not be true for some off-brand electric scooters or bikes, because if they're not well executed, you shouldn't charge them indoors. Now, here's a simple example of an ultralight carbon fiber race car hitting a wall at 290 kilometers an hour. And that's 9 times as much kinetic energy as you would have hitting a wall at highway speed. So there's a driver in this thing that's rolling over and over. That doesn't look very good. Well,
and the best news is that Catherine Legg has walked out of the medical center under your own power. How are you feeling? A bit shaken, but I'm okay, as you can see. Oh, sorry. All my bits are intact, so it's good. Goes to show how strong the cars are.
Where do you have some injuries?
Oh, I just banged my knee, car upside down. You bang your legs on the bulkhead and on the steering column and stuff. So just a bit of bruising, which won't look too attractive in my dress in the Atlantic's banquet tonight. But
I think we would all like to have autos that crash-worthy. Now, here comes the next efficiency leapfrog now emerging. There's a couple of solar-powered hypercars ready to enter the market around now, both of them from firms I advise. And they can mass produce as soon as they finish raising their last bit of capital. Most drivers will never need to recharge this two-seat electric vehicle because on top it has 3 square meters of solar cells, and they capture enough energy to drive 40 to 60 kilometers a day. So it's as if your present car magically added 8 liters of fuel to its tank every day you park it outside. To make a long trip, you can quickly recharge the tiny batteries, as in the lower left picture, with household electricity and get ranges with a bigger battery up to 1,600 kilometers if you want the cost and weight of the bigger battery. To make a long trip, you can quickly recharge. And my BMW and Tesla electric cars are among the most efficient sold, but charging even as it drives, this two-seat, three-wheeled vehicle with a very crash-worthy carbon and glass composite body will nearly triple Tesla efficiency. So they get better than 0.7 liters equivalent per 100 kilometers, or 343 miles per gallon equivalent. And the drag coefficient, 0.13, and the small frontal area reportedly give this car less air drag than just the windshield wipers or the side mirror of a standard pickup truck. Now, over 40,000 of these have been ordered. Production is ready once the last bit of capital comes in. They're already well along in tooling. And meanwhile, the Dutch firm Lightyear also developed a 5-seat, 4-wheel, 725 kilometer range, light, very aerodynamic car with 5 square meters of solar cells on top and 0.9 liters per 100 kilometer, or 250 miles per gallon equivalent efficiency. So it can add about 12 kilometers of range for every hour in the sun. Now, Lightyear delivered a small number of these vehicles, and then they ran out of manufacturing capital in early 2023 and decided to restart by leapfrogging straight to a successor model priced at $32,000 and starting U.S. production in, they hope, 2026. Meanwhile, they're seeking revenue from providing their automotive solar system to other makers. And these guys also really know what they're doing. They won the solar car race several years running for the world. Now, whatever the fate of these two models in the marketplace, they are important existence proofs, and even they could be further improved by even lighter materials and some recent advances in propulsion. Now, integrative design can also combine with generative design. That's a software method of structural optimization that often yields biomimetic results. And that, plus switching from cast iron to aluminum, took out 3/4 of the weight of this engine mount for a big Volvo truck. Aptera already uses this same technique. Now, 3 years ago, Mercedes revealed a nearly doubled efficiency developmental car that initially got 7.5 miles per kilowatt hour. That's 252 miles per gallon equivalent, same as the Lightyear, and with far stronger backing. Later, they raised that to 8.5 miles per kilowatt hour, 286 miles per gallon equivalent. They have 95% efficiency battery to wheels, exemplary 0.17 drag coefficient, effective frontal drag area, CDA, just 0.36 square meters, which compared to half a square meter in their production version now, the EQS. And the curb mass is just 9% above that of a standard range Tesla Model 3. But this car's range was tested at over 1,200 kilometers, almost 750 miles. The battery is sized for a compact electric vehicle, but it's so effective in this much bigger, more efficient car because drag and rolling resistance are so low that you can cruise at 131 kilometers an hour, 81 miles an hour, on just 10 kilowatts or 14 horsepower. There's even a rooftop solar array to help run the accessories. So the battery has nearly 100 usable kilowatt hours, runs at 900 volts, over 900, and weighs 495 kilos. So that's 200 watt hours per kilogram. Impressive. And that battery pack is 30% lighter and 50% smaller than the production EQS models, slightly bigger battery. That's a sign of how quickly batteries are evolving, often with the help of electric race car technologies that big automakers tend to sponsor. Now, these kinds of designs, I think, mean that range anxiety will become as obsolete as the speed of your modem. Your what? Especially since this sedan, despite some composites, is mainly made of metal. So that leaves more efficiency and range gains on the table. But if automakers use better batteries, higher energy density to keep raising range 10% a year, much as they use more horsepower for acceleration rather than efficiency, the battery supply chains are going to get challenging, and the compounding benefits of ultralighting and mass decompounding will tend to get lost. So capturing them requires a different design philosophy. Now, radical vehicle fitness enables all kinds of advanced powertrain, battery, fuel cell, whatever. Our original carbon fiber SUV design in 2000 illustrates this. Long before cheap batteries, one of its variants used an early fuel cell, but it had 2/3 less tractive load. So the hydrogen tanks got 2/3 smaller for the same range. So we could use 1990s off-the-shelf cylindrical carbon fiber tanks at 345 bar pressure. That's 5,000 psi. And the tanks packaged easily and could safely carry hydrogen up to 10 or 12% of their own filled mass. We did not need, therefore, the tanks at twice the pressure, 700 bar, like Toyota's 1,850 kilogram Mirai fuel cell car. Now, I am in awe of Mirai's doubled power density, 95% cheaper in 9 years fuel cell. But that fuel cell and the tanks could be 2 or 3 times smaller if they were put not in the 4.6-fold heavier Prius 5 platform compared to Toyota's concept carbon fiber 1X you saw earlier. If the car is 4.6 times lighter, the powertrain is going to be a lot smaller and cheaper. And I've been encouraging Toyota to make this comparison empirically. They seem somehow reluctant. Might be a little embarrassing. Now, indeed, our own SUV design's low tractive load made its fuel cell 3 times smaller, but that means you can pay 3 times more per kilowatt. At a standard 80% experience curve, you would then need about 32 times less cumulative production volume to reach competitive cost. So you could speed the hydrogen transition by a decade or two. That strategy is part of integrating mobile and stationary uses of hydrogen and fuel cells, so each use speeds the other. We worked that out for the National Hydrogen Association in '99. Broadly, though, batteries have now pulled ahead of fuel cell hydrogen systems in nearly all use cases, and that dims the prospects for this part of the hydrogen economy, but it does reduce cost and complexity. I mentioned a different design philosophy. If you want to save so much weight, you have to make lightness snowball by going repeatedly around the design spiral or design cycle. And that means first you make the vehicle light and slippery, so you cut its tractive load, say, in half. You enable smaller and more advanced powertrain and smaller, lighter chassis components. less brake to stop it, less suspension to hold it up. And that leaves you more packaging volume and more crush space for safety. But then you go around the spiral again and you make the components smaller because the structural loads are shrinking. The less weight you have, the less weight you need. Lightness multiplies. But such recursions can also eliminate components. A good series hybrid does not need transmission, clutch, flywheel, drive shaft, U-joints, axles, differentials, starter, alternator. 9 things go away, and each of them then triggers another cycle of mass decompounding, snowballing weight savings. Now, at first, it looks like the special materials, powertrain, and design might be too costly, the red part of the curve. But after many recursive cycles of mass decompounding, you need so little carbon fiber and such a small powertrain that with the simplified manufacturing, the total cost of the vehicle can revert to normal or even less. Of course, this is cost per car, the way we buy cars. It is not cost per part or per kilogram, which is how most automakers and the National Academy still mistakenly think about cost. By the way, you've heard this somewhere before. Does this approach to car design remind you of how we shrank or eliminated HVAC in buildings by making the building more efficient? And then that paid for the efficiency. Does it remind you how we have to cost per building, not cost per unit of insulation? It's the same idea. You'll find this strategy in every sector. Let me give a few practical examples of taking parts and weight out of cars. Tesla's original Roadster had a 2-speed gearbox, and it kept blowing up because it couldn't deliver both 0 to 60 miles an hour in 4.6 seconds and a top speed of 125 miles an hour. 2 manufacturers that were good at gearboxes failed, and the chief engineer, my friend J.B. Straubel, was griping about it one day. I said, gee, maybe the right answer is no gearbox, just a single speed reduction gear. So he thought it over, and one day he came in and told his team, let's insource this problem to our core capability. We're electrical engineers. If our motor could produce 1/3 more torque, we wouldn't need the gearbox. And then we'll tweak the power electronics and software to match. Well, they protested, but the motor will overheat and they'll have to Band-Aid on some Baroque cooling system. He said, oh, don't worry, we'll figure out what's getting hot and we'll give it better conductivity or a bigger cross-section. And so was born the 2010 Roadster 1.5. Eliminating its gearbox gained 10 miles of range, 14 pounds lighter weight, 40 more horsepower, less noise, less maintenance, less warranty cost, and impressively lower manufacturing costs in an industry that'll kill for a nickel. The savings were orders of magnitude more than that. Well, I then told the story to the excellent chief engineer of a major automaker and suggested 2 morals of this story. First, that electronics and software offer a vastly bigger design space than the mature Victorian mechanical arts. And second, that the advantage in exploiting that flexibility probably goes more to the small, agile firm than the big, rich firm. So he reflected on that for a few weeks and then surprised everyone with a trade press interview explaining that although he had always thought internal combustion engines would rule for another half century, he now changed his mind and felt electric traction was the way forward. And that popped the cork on his company's innovation. Well, now less than a decade later, 2 major competitors have designed their last internal combustion engines. Another one, the global tipping point, has announced it's ending new investments in internal combustion engine cars. Actually, 2 have said that. And many other automakers have announced regional or global ICE phase-outs between 2025 and 2040. 17 of them have set net zero targets. Volkswagen, with dozens of electric models, is discovering that it's hard to beat Tesla just on volume, because Tesla isn't really a car company. It's a software and systems company, some of whose products happen to have wheels. But Tesla needn't straddle two competing markets. More on that in a minute. Now, the same relentless pressure for simplification is now overcoming the industry's tendency to equip components with individual heating and cooling systems or with forests of hoses. Instead, Tesla's Model 3 used a single molded plastic part whose four-way valve redirects the thermal energy real time from where it is to where it's needed, optimally sequencing and cascading temperatures. And it was so elegantly simple that it took Sandy Munro more than a week to figure it out. And the many benefits include at least 10 miles of extra range. Model Y's octo valve plus a redesigned heat pump reportedly increased range by an astonishing 10% and spread to other models. Amazing work. Likewise, the 5 separate power-related modules in the Chevy Bolt stacked together in the left photo, Tesla's Model 3 eliminates 2 and consolidates 2 more into other modules. So the system's radically simplified and achieves the same familiar suite of benefits. And the same logic applies to everything in the vehicle. Panasonic made its audio system weigh 30 to 60% less, draw 60% less power, and sound the same or better. Tesla switched in the Cybertruck from a 12 to a 48-volt wiring harness, saving 3/4 of the wiring and half the copper, while reducing losses that were only making useless heat. And you can do a lot even without carbon fiber. Lucid, led by the former Tesla executive Peter Rawlinson, is selling its introductory Air model, which was the 22 car of the year in Motor Trend, at a base price of $71,000. And its compact powertrain helps fit a spacious luxury interior into a mid-sized package. Its efficiency focus wanted a record, at the time, 520-mile EPA range rating with a big 118 kilowatt hour 900-volt battery set up for bidirectional charging. Power is up to 1,111 horsepower, 828 kilowatts, so it can do 0 to 60 miles an hour in 2.5 seconds. However, it's all aluminum monocoque, and its battery mass compounding brought its curb weight to just over 5,200 pounds, 2,361 kilos. In other words, 82% heavier than the 5-seat and still all-metal original Lightyear with its 450-mile range, and nearly 6 times the weight of Toyota's 2007 Prius-sized but very functional carbon fiber 1X concept car. So I hope some dramatic structural lightweighting may be in Lucid's future. You know, the concept CLA class sedan that Mercedes announced at the end of 2024, wait, not yet published, is rated at 5.2 miles per kilowatt hour, edging out the Lucid Air Pure's world-leading 5.0. And that technology came from that 2022 EQXX developmental car I showed you earlier, and from the designer's novel mindset. Now, ultralighting requires not just smart and uninhibited engineers, but also organizing them differently. Dave Taggart brought us from the Skunk Works what became our Revolution SUV's design process. It made 7 engineers all around the same table, collectively responsible for dauntingly ambitious whole vehicle requirements that the industry had no idea how to meet. Each engineer also owned one major vehicle system or function, but for those we deliberately wrote no requirements because we didn't want him to make his problem into her problem. We wanted to make the whole team design a highly integrated vehicle together. 2 of the engineers were not comfortable without their very own requirements, so we replaced them in the first week or 2, and then it went great, and we got the intended result. Toyota asked us how we did it. We told them. Out came the 400-kilogram 1X concept car. And such novel design processes flow from revolutionary design mentality. Dave Taggart learned at the Skunk Works to design in the future, not in the past. So when the Soviets shot down Francis Gary Powers' U-2 spy plane in 1960, Kelly Johnson did not say, I'm going to design a slightly better U-2. He said in paraphrase, I want to own the skies for decades, so we'll design a Blackbird, SR-71. I don't know how, but we'll figure out. And they did. It took about 13 months. Because Johnson understood that such an airplane was impossible within the conventional design context. He knew that design is like a rubber band. If you try to stretch it too far from the conventional design space, you encounter more and more resistance, and eventually it breaks. But if you jump to the new design space you aspire to, then you can stretch the rubber band back to fit technologies that aren't ripe yet, and as they mature, the rubber band then relaxes to where you want to be. Siloed cultures will not get you there. Now, in our second mobility lecture, we'll dig into electric and heavy vehicles and the wider mobility systems that they enable. Thank you.